So I had a baby late in life, and I'm so, so glad that I did. I really wanted this child. It was my second one, and for a couple of years before I had him, there was just this voice saying, "You're not done with your family," even though I had been convinced that I was. And so I said, "Fine, I'm really old to have a baby. I don't have a lot of energy, but I was just getting this voice in my head." And so I said, "I'll try 3 times to get this kid." And I tried 3 times and I got the kid. And I'm so grateful that I have this kid. So when I was pregnant with him, I had just gotten a new car as well. And the new car came with what they called at the time run flat tires, which means if you got a hole, the tire still ran. And there was lore out there that said these new run flat tires would sometimes make people feel car sick. And I was getting car sick constantly. And it could be the pregnancy, it could be the run flat tires, I didn't know. But every ride home from work, I was just car sick. And so I had tons of ultrasounds on this baby and everything was fine. And then I had the baby. And then the first year of his life, I was popping Tums left and right because I just felt sick all the time. And about 18 months into his life, I started seeking medical care for this condition because I was throwing up a lot and I didn't feel well and my stomach was gurgling constantly. And I went to see my family care practitioner, who was a woman who I liked. And she said, "Let's not jump to anything scary. You have adult onset lactose intolerance." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, let's give that a try." I don't think so, but let's give that a try. And so for a while there, I just stopped eating lactose, but I also stopped eating anything because anything that I ate made me feel so sick. So my son's getting older and he's about to turn 2, and I was still breastfeeding him at the time, last baby and all that. And so my mother was saying, "You really have to stop breastfeeding him." And I thought, you know what, we're going to stop when we're going to stop. And so his second birthday came around and I wasn't eating very much at all, but I stopped breastfeeding on my own, my decision. He didn't agree, but it was my decision. So I stopped breastfeeding on my own. And then about a week or two after his birthday, I wasn't eating anything at all. And I was like, "Does it feel great when I don't eat? So it must be lactose intolerance." And then my boss had a birthday party and she had this amazing buttercream cake. And so I thought, I haven't eaten any of that. I'm starved. It looks like a good cake. I adore her. I ate the cake and I was just so, so, so sick. So I spent the whole night just not feeling well at all. And we had a nanny in the house. And so about 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, I can't wait anymore. I got to go wake up the nanny. So I woke up the nanny and I drove myself to the hospital and I said, "I don't feel good." So it was a weird time of the year where there were so many people in the emergency room at that hour that I was sitting in the hallway for hours and hours and hours, just sitting in a bed in the hallway. So I got all the workup and everything and slept for a couple of hours. And then all of you came in because I was in the hospital and you were a very supportive family. I had my dad and my mom. No, you weren't there. It was just dad and mom. And then the nanny came in. And I don't know why I put you in that in that hallway, but it wasn't the hallway.
And you were still in California at this time.
Exactly, exactly. So then the doctor came up and I went to the nice hospital because I thought, if I'm going to be admitted, I want to go to the nice hospital, not the teaching hospital. So I was in the nice hospital in the hallway and the doctor came up to me and he said exactly what I knew he was going to say. And he said, "You have a blockage of your intestine and it's unlikely to be benign." And like I knew he was going to say that. But all of a sudden, I was in this huge trench, and the walls above me were just this sort of slippery cliff, and I knew I was never going to be able to climb out of that. I was just in this trench, and those words, "It's unlikely to be benign," were just bouncing off the walls left and right, and I heard it over and over and over again, sitting in that hallway. And so they rushed me over to surgery after I'd been sick for 6 months. But anyway, rushed me over to surgery, took the blockage out, and then they diagnosed me with a stage 4 colon cancer. And I was in my young 40s. I just turned 2-year-old and I had a 10-year-old and I'm a single mom. Like, in what world is this fair? In what world do I have room on my plate for this? So I had the surgery. I was in the hospital for about, well, it was the first day of the surgery. The nanny came in with my 2-year-old son and he was so upset seeing me in bed, seeing me with the wires and everything. He was just screaming and crying and trying to climb all over the nanny to get out of there. And so I said, "Nanny, take the baby home. He doesn't have to see me here. He's clearly upset." And because of that, and because the doctor knew that I was a single mom, this doctor came in and said, "You know what? I think you have bigger things you need to do at home. So instead of, if you want to go now, you can go home and recover." And so I went home and recovered, which for me was so, so much better than worrying what my son was feeling and what my daughter was feeling. So I got to be at home with them and recover. And of course, since we had the nanny, that was very, very, very helpful. So I honestly, at this point, so much of this I've tried to block out. So at what point did I call you and tell you that I had stage 4 cancer?
I don't remember. I think I may have blocked it out as well.
I never really broke down to cry about it or be upset about it. I do remember after the surgery, just a couple hours after the surgery, I had air bubbles in my body, and that was one of the most painful things I'd ever gone through, even though I just 2 years before had a C-section. But that was extremely painful. And I think with surgeries, those kinds of things are often underappreciated by the doctor. So I was just writhing in pain. It felt like my insides were being torn apart because that's essentially what it is. The bubbles are looking for space to go up, but they're just sort of ripping through your flesh at that point. And so I was in so much pain, and the nurses would come in and say, "Oh no, that's normal. It's just bubbles trying to get out of your body." I think, well, this is not normal. I mean, normal maybe, but okay, certainly not. So I do remember too that before I had the surgery, this is all going to be out of order, but before I had the surgery, when they had already diagnosed, but what they really wanted was a colonoscopy, just to see what it looked like from the other side, and to see what the size was, and see if they could find any kind of polyps around the tumor. And so they gave me that cement stuff that usually you start about 45, and I wasn't even 45 yet. You start at 45 or 50 when you get your colonoscopy, and you have to drink all of that big cement stuff that clears out your colon. And so they gave me this thing, and it was in this gigantic tub, and they put it down in my bedside table. This was before the surgery. And they said, "Here, try to get as much of this down as you can." But I had been a couple of months with 100% blockage of my colon. I'm like, where do you think that's going to go? And so I took a sip, threw it up, took a sip, threw it up. And finally they said, "Okay, you know what? We understand that you have a blockage in your colon, so this is not going to go through and clean out your colon. So let's just give it up." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. Why couldn't we give it up before we even started to try? Did they think there was going to be all of a sudden a hole made and I could clean out the rest of the colon?"
They probably did. They probably thought that maybe there was a chance that they could get a little bit out.
But even so, the purpose of that colonoscopy cement is to like abrade and clean out your colon. And if I'm getting a drop of it through, it's not going to do the job that they thought. So we gave that up, had the surgery, had the pain after the surgery, saw my son flip out. Doctor told me I could go home and recover. So I did that, which was amazing. I also have to say, having my mom and dad in town was extremely helpful as well. I don't think they did a whole lot but hold my hand, but that was plenty. And probably play with the kids, because that was plenty too. So after that, we got all the results back, and it was a stage 4 colon cancer with 100% blockage. And there was evidence of metastases. And because of that, because of the stage, because of how aggressive it was, and because of the metastases, I had to go through chemotherapy. So they prescribed a chemotherapy regimen. It was going to be 12 months or so.
12 months?
It was going to be about 12 months of chemotherapy, which is a big part of your life when your kid's 2 and then they're going to be 3, and your kid's 10 and they're going to be 11. That's a big, big chunk. So that was prescribed to me, and it was, state of the art. I actually went from the nice hospital to the teaching hospital, which to me is the best place to be if you need some serious medical care. It's a teaching hospital. It was UCSF. It's the forefront of oncology, and I felt very well cared for at UCSF. So I went there, and they prescribed the drugs for me, and I had to recover from the surgery for 2 whole months before I could even start chemotherapy. But when I left the hospital and I got transferred over to UCSF for care, the doctor told me, "You need to start chemotherapy within 2 months." And what he meant, what he probably said, and I didn't hear right, was, "You need to start chemotherapy after the 2-month mark because you need to recover first." So I was in this panic of 2 months is coming up. I don't have an appointment to start the chemotherapy. I need to do it before those 2 months. And according to the doctors, I needed to start it after that 2 months. And therefore, that a couple weeks before that 2-month mark came up was really stressful. So I, fortunately at the time, had one of the best mentors that I had ever had as a boss. And so I called her from the hospital at that point and told her what was happening, and she was devastated and also extremely supportive. And she said, "Just go. Just do what you need to do, come into work when you want to come into work, or don't," whatever it was. She didn't force me to fill out paperwork. She didn't force me to do any kind of medical leave. It wasn't even forcing. It was probably the right thing to have done. But she just said, "Look, go, just take care of it. I'll take care of this. You take care of yourself." It wasn't... When I had my daughter, which was 10 years before that, 12 years before that, she came out as an emergency as well. And so as soon as I had her, it was I had preeclampsia, and so I had her really quick. And then about 2 days after I gave birth to her, my boss at the time called me and said, "You've abandoned your job and you're going to get fired for abandonment of your job because you didn't fill out the paperwork." I just thought, of all the hundred ways you could approach that conversation to a mother of a 2-day old, saying you're going to lose your job because you've abandoned it is not the right thing. Because I was in touch. They knew I was having a baby. They knew all of that. But this idea of sort of pressuring me to fill out this paperwork so I don't lose my job was such a juxtaposition from when I had cancer and my boss that didn't even bring it up. She just like, go, just do what you need to do, which was amazing. So she hired someone to come in and essentially be me, a full-time person to be me temporarily, so that when I came into the office, that guy was there and I would just download everything to him that needed to be done. And when I was not there, he got everything done. So that became like a symbiotic relationship. I really respect that person, and he's one of my favorite people to today because he was just there. You tell me and I'll get it done. And he could read my mind a bit, and he made it really much easier for me to not be in the office all the time. So there was a 2-month period. I had the surgery in October, so it was November, December, and then I started chemotherapy late December. I think it was like the 23rd or 22nd of December, and that Christmas sucked. Really sucked for a lot of reasons, and we'll get to that. But during that 2-month period, the tumor was gone. I felt pretty well. And, I was young and healthy, and so I was home with my 2-year-old son, which was amazing, but I was bored. I got bored. We have nannies from France who came to take care of my son, and they would stay for 1 year, and they transferred around the 15th of December. So we got this new woman in. Her name is Lana, and I have a lot of favorite people, but she's definitely one of my favorite people because she came to the US right before Christmas, so she's missing her family. She was 23, 24 years old, brand new country, didn't speak English really strong. And then I laid on her, "Oh, by the way, I have cancer too, and you're going to have to help out a lot more than I thought you would." And she's like, "Great, I'm here, no problem." And she was absolutely 100% there for my kids and for me. It was amazing. So that Christmas, she got food poisoning. So my dad came over. He loved to cook the turkey dinner for Christmas. So my dad came to my house and my mom came to my house. They thought, you know what, we're not going to invite you over for Christmas dinner because I could barely get out of bed. And so we were cooking Christmas dinner, and the nanny kept popping out of the kitchen to go vomit, and I kept popping out of the kitchen to go vomit. So it was just, nobody ate the food because my kids don't like turkey dinner. My dad probably ate the food. My mom probably ate a little bit of it, but nobody else was eating. It was just a really tough Christmas. Some of the good things were my parents were being really accommodating, and the nanny was even though she was thrown up, she was all in to help out in the kitchen and do whatever we needed to do. So I remember that Christmas, but not for the right reasons. However, there was one song that kept coming up. It's Jess Glynn. I'm totally going to cry because it reminds me of my baby girl. "Hold My Hand." It was so sweet. So I felt that about my daughter, that she was there for me, right? She was, I don't know, it was about this song about not being alone. And I wasn't at all alone, which is really good. So I'm so emotional about songs, but that one, I kept playing it on Christmas Day. And it just, the presence of my kids and having been so lucky to have them before all this happened was just amazing. Even my son, just so young. So I was him so young when I got diagnosed that I knew that when I was pregnant with him, this tumor was growing. It wasn't growing so fast that it came in within 2 years. I know that tumor was there. And because I was such an old mom, I had so many ultrasounds, and no one looked to the side of the uterus to see if there was a tumor right there. So it was interesting to me how I completely had this amazing healthy baby and then ended up with a tumor right next to where he was living for 9 months or 7 months. So I started on this chemotherapy regimen, which was the best one. It was a 3-week cycle, and they wanted me to do enough of those to go 10, 11, 12 months, depending on how long I could tolerate it. And so it would start with an at-home infusion where I wore this little bag, and it was, tucked into my central vein port for 3 full days, and it would just infuse over 3 full days. And then I would go get an infusion at the hospital, and that took, 4 or 5 hours. And then I would go home and I would spend the next 3 weeks just recovering from that. So the first week after those 2 infusions, I felt pretty well. Not perfect, but pretty well. And then the second week was awful. The third week, it kind of climbed back up again. But these chemotherapies were cumulative. So every 3-week period that went by was worse and worse and worse. So there are 2 things that made it particularly hard for me. And I understand it's hard for everybody for their own reasons. But one thing was that I'm type 1 diabetic. and I've been type 1 diabetic since I was 11 years old. And I remember when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I thought to myself very distinctly, okay, well, this isn't great news being diabetic forever and ever and ever, but at least now I know that I won't get cancer. That was my conclusion of being type 1 diabetic. I know I'm not going to get cancer, because that would just, what kind of universe would put type 1 diabetes and cancer in the same person? Like, well, my universe, right? So when I went through chemotherapy in the 20 teens, the general protocol was to give steroids right before the infusions. And the steroids really helped with energy, and it helped with diminishing all the side effects, the vomiting, the inflammation, all of those negative side effects that people have had from chemotherapy for generations were really mitigated by these high dose steroids, like high dose steroids right before the infusion. But high dose steroids make blood sugar go too high. And as a diabetic, it was dangerous for them to give me high dose steroids because my insulin needs would triple or quadruple. And so they said, we're just going to skip the steroids, which means putting me back into like 1960s chemotherapy. So I was super sick, super sick. I didn't feel well at all. So the other thing that made it really hard for me was during my first infusion, when I went into the infusion center, which honestly was really nice. They had these big lounges, and the nurses were very kind, and there was good colors. It wasn't hospital colors, and they had nice floors. Anyway, I was in the infusion center, and they strapped onto the central vein port, which was right here. And within about 15 minutes, my tongue started to itch. And they're very, very worried about people being allergic to the chemotherapy drugs. And so they immediately pumped IV Benadryl. So I remember distinctly, I was playing, my mom was there with me. It's just me and my mom. She was so kind to drive me and sit with me. So we were playing a video game called My Singing Monsters, which is like, it was a great bonding moment between me and my mom. And so she's like, no, look at this one. This is about to hatch, whatever. And so she gave me the phone, and I just sort of, eyes rolled back in my head, and I said, I don't think I can. I was trying so hard to stay awake, but IV Benadryl, I was knocked out. So it turns out I was allergic to the chemotherapy drug. So there was another chemotherapy drug they could give me, and so I started on that, and that was fine. It was not the least side effect one, but the least side effect one, I was actually allergic to that. So what I found out later, though, was it wasn't the infusion I got in the hospital that I was allergic to. It was the drug that I took in the morning. So I had the 3-day sort of infusion that I took home with me. And then the morning of my chemotherapy, I took a pill that was sort of a predisposing the chemotherapy agents. And then I got the infusion at the hospital. But it was the drug I took in the morning that I was allergic to. Because even when they changed my regimen of in-hospital chemotherapy, I still got that numb tongue. And so it was actually not the one that they changed that I was allergic to, it was the other one. But I wasn't allergic enough to get anaphylaxis. And so
did they figure that out early enough to get you back on the better, less side effect drug?
No.
Or like, how did they figure that out?
I figured that out later on, because it wasn't every single time I took it that I got the numb tongue. It was the cycle 6, cycle 7 that I got the numb tongue. And I thought, okay, you know what? It is actually that one. And by that point, we had different things to talk about, so I didn't discuss that. But yeah, no, they were really on top of things. If I had said something, they would have tried to figure that out. But no, it was the other. I got the second chemotherapy drug. So they warned me the very first time I left the hospital after the infusion. They warned me. They said, if the weather is cold at all, your throat might feel a little bit swollen. It might be a little bit harder to swallow. And it was a cold San Francisco day. It was December. And so I walked out and I'm thinking, no problem at all. I'm walking still. I feel fine. It was just the first infusion. I had the 3 days and then the pill and then the infusion. So I'm walking out to the car, and the chill hit me, and my throat didn't swell or anything. It just completely closed. Completely closed. I had to sit on the sidewalk and like just calm myself, because it was just so hard to breathe, because the cold just completely closed up my throat. Just closed it up completely. And so our mom was there, and she said, well, are you okay? Do you want me to go get the car? And I'm like, no, just give me a second. I don't know what to do. So that was one of the terrible side effects, was my throat closing anytime it got cold. I couldn't drink cold water. The nausea was horrible, horrible. But as I said, the first week was okay. The second week was terrible. And then I sort of fought back for the third week. So the first week was the best. And after 1 or 2 cycles, I would wait for that first week, because I believe that was the only time that I could eat. And I remember third cycle-ish, I was losing tons of weight. I got really hungry, and so my mom and dad took me to Sizzler. which is a great restaurant, a buffet, all you can eat. Like, yes, sign me up. So I asked the waiter, I said, do you have any lukewarm water? And he said, we don't serve lukewarm water. I'm so sorry, we don't have that. And he left. He came back and he had an ice cold water and he had hot water from tea and a separate glass. He figured it out for me. He solved the problem for me. Didn't even know why I needed the lukewarm water, but he's like, you know what? I got your back. And that meant a lot to me that day, that he solved that problem for me. So the side effects were just, I think I was taking 6 or 7 medications to mitigate the side effects, and then 3 medications for chemotherapy. So it was just tons of stuff. The nausea was terrible. I was throwing up all the time. When I brushed my teeth, I would gag constantly, and so I would often throw up every time I brushed my teeth, which is so silly because I'm a toothbrusher. I love brushing my teeth, and to have it ruined by throwing up when I'm brushing my teeth, it counteracts the whole purpose of brushing teeth. But I wasn't eating that much, so it doesn't really matter if I brush my teeth, right? So there was the vomiting, there was the nausea constantly, there was the complete lack of energy. I decided early on, like from cycle 1, I decided that I have 2 kids who need me and I'm not going to negatively affect their life as much as I possibly can avoid it. And I decided, well, I'm not eating. I'm going to go out. I'm going to sit at the dinner table with these 2 kids every single night. And I did that. I sat at the dinner table with them. Didn't eat, but I sat there every night. So a lot of times the nanny would cook for them. Most of the time we had the community who had arranged for food delivery service. And so we had, like Monday night, we'd get 3 nights worth of food delivered, and then we could eat that over the period of the week. And when we didn't have leftovers, we would have something, the pasta, something the kids could make. So I don't think I cooked, but I don't think I ate either. But I was there at the dinner table every single night. And I'm really super proud of myself for that. And I know that that you were there for a period of that time, because I remember distinctly a photo of you and me and my 2-year-old son when I was just looking so pale and sick, and at the dinner table that I always sat at. So you came to visit me for a bit. Do you remember visiting? You had platinum blonde hair.
I do remember the platinum blonde, but I don't remember coming out then. I remember coming out when your little guy was born.
Yes. So this was, I have a picture of the 2-year-old, and I was super sick. Okay, so it is the 6th of January. So my kids went to French school, and now we live in Quebec, so we are surrounded a lot by French culture. And there's an event called Galette de Roi, which is the king's cake. And they take a little toy or a prize or something, and they cook it into a cake, and then whoever gets the slice with that prize in it is the king, and they get to wear the crown and everything. And I know that you were there for Galette de Roi, which is January 6th, or around January 6th. So I think you came to visit sometime in January. So I probably was still feeling a little bit well at that point. I hadn't had too many cycles by then, but still not feeling well. So I had the nausea, the throwing up, the gagging with the toothbrush. I had numbness and tingling in my limbs, which is, again, the stupid contradictory symptoms. I had anything cold, the weather cold or water cold, made my throat completely close up, and it was really hard to breathe. Sometimes I couldn't walk on my legs. I didn't have enough energy to walk on my legs. It was just, the symptoms were just horrible and contradictory, and I was taking so many drugs to combat them, and they didn't really do a whole lot. I think the steroids would have done a lot more. But during that sort of 3rd week of each cycle, I felt well enough to go to work. I didn't feel well enough to go to work, but I wanted to get out of the house, and I wanted to do something, and I wanted to check in with my people and my job. And so I usually spent at least 3 or 4 days that 3rd week at the office. And I had a handicap placard because I could barely walk. And I remember this story still to this day pisses me off, because I was parked in the handicap spot, and I got out of the car, and I must have looked, like I look right now. And I had my briefcase, and I parked close to the front because I couldn't walk that far. And so I got out of the car, and this old white man said to me, "You don't look handicapped." Not like, "You don't look handicapped, you look great, but you don't look handicapped." And I have a conversation in my head with that guy, even though I just let him go, because he was just being stupid. Is it the inability to breathe, the inability to walk? Is it the constant vomiting? Is it the diarrhea? Is it what is it that makes you think that I'm not needing to park next to my office when I'm dragging myself out of bed, putting some comb through my hair and dragging myself to the office just so I can feel normal for a couple of days? What about that to you thinks that I should park further away from the door? So we've had that conversation many times, but it still pisses me off. Like if you don't know what you're talking about, don't say anything. You don't know what that person's going through. And this is just a classic example of that. So
Entitlement.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it wasn't the last handicap parking spot. It was entitlement because he didn't think that I was entitled to a parking spot. So if
Yeah.
he wasn't entitled to it, then I certainly could have been entitled to it.
Yeah. And also, he was entitled to say whatever the fuck he wants to say to you.
Exactly. Exactly. So I don't know how much of that incident pissed me off or how much that just emblematic of so much of life pisses me off. I don't know. I'm still mad about it today, so it could just be the way life is. So one of my early appointments, I brought my friend Robin. She was amazing support as well, lived in the city with me. And so she went to the appointment with me and she was saying, get get pot. This was before pot was legalized. She was like, get pot. You can have it for medical reasons. So I got to ask the doctor about pot. She was just like, do it, do it, do it. And I was thinking I'm already like compromised significantly. I already spend 6 hours, 8 hours a day in bed plus nighttime. And so I didn't. That's just not my style. I'm not a pot person and I didn't think it would help. And I thought it would honestly just take me away from my attention to my kids when they needed me. So I didn't do that, even though I had go ask. But I did ask for the handicap placard and I got that. So that was I'm not going to go so far as to say that was a good thing. It was a less bad thing to be able to park in a handicap spot. So I went through many, many cycles of this, and every cycle got worse. And I was in and out of the emergency room left and right because I would get dehydrated because I couldn't eat. When I went to the infusions, it was, as I said, it was a beautiful room, and the big chairs were beautiful, and they didn't have to the hospital accoutrement everywhere. Nothing was, beeping too loud, and it wasn't white sterile. It was colorful and brown, like earth tones and comforting. And the nurses were just, so it was like we were checking into a hotel, like, oh, please, here's your seat. You can have a seat here. Make yourself comfortable. Here's your cubby and whatever. Nice seat for my mom to sit with me the whole time. But the first time that I had the infusion, it almost made me laugh because I had already had surgery to put in a central line. So it's like a little clip right here that had a little cover on it. But then they could just plug right in, and whatever infusion I needed to have, they could just put that in there. It had to go through my skin in a pretty big needle because it's a central vein. So having that installed every 3 weeks was really painful. So they give me a little bit of anesthesia, but that's anesthesia for the top surface. There's like all the layers of skin and the vein that it's going through. So the anesthesia for the central vein, the central line, was woefully inadequate. But nonetheless, I would put the anesthesia on and I would get the thing clicked in there. And the nurses, who are amazing, wonderful nurses, they would suit up with this, like the hazmat suit, and they'd put the gloves on and tape the gloves on, and they'd have the booties on, and then they'd put the big old, thing over their face. And then they'd put what they're protecting themselves from into my central vein. I just thought it was so funny. And I totally get that they do this all day, every day, and they don't want to be exposed. I totally get that. But what kind of a chemical do they not want even to have a risk of getting onto their skin that they're putting into my central vein? It just seemed like there was something really wrong with that. And interesting now, I never thought of this before, but they never protected mom from it. They didn't make her go stand in the corner. I think it really was just the repeated exposure that made them worried about it. But it was so funny. And let me put that inside my body, but don't get any of it on you. Interesting.
I've had that experience with some at the hospital as well, and it's like, but you're protecting yourself, but you're protecting me.
Right. You're putting that inside of me, not just on my skin.
Yeah.
Right. So the infusions weren't great, but that was a great time. My mom always with me. She was amazing, drove me home. I went through maybe 6 months of the chemotherapy and I was just deteriorating. I had lost so much weight. I had no energy. I still made it to the dinner table, but I was sometimes dragging to get to the dinner table. I remember sometimes I would see the kids off to school and I would just be sitting on the front porch and just couldn't even move. And the kids were complaining, I don't want to go to school. And the nanny was like, look at your mother, get yourself to school. Because your mother, she got up to, anyway, it was a tough time. Obviously, it was a tough time. Little understatement. At one of my next appointments, I said, I just can't do this anymore. And I was expecting them to argue with me or say, here, you're supposed to go 10 to 12 months. That's the protocol, and that's what we've studied. And so we encourage you to go those 10 to 12 months. And instead, the doctor said, you know what, let's give you the steroids next time and see if that makes a difference. So I took the steroids, and it made a huge difference. But at that point, the damage had already been done. So I had to take really, really good care of my blood sugar because it did skyrocket, and that's another problem they don't want to have to deal with on top of all of this. But while the steroids did work, it was too late. It was too late and too much work with blood sugar. And so the next appointment, I said, I have to be done. And the doctor said, okay, that's it. No argument, no guilt, no, but,
Okay.
but it was all just okay. Actually, she said, we're not here to try to torture you. If you're done, then you're done. And so I was done, and it was too early. But there's so much processing that happens after these 6 months, or at that point it had been 8 months because the surgery was 2 months in addition to that. Like, what was that all for? That's the biggest question I had. And years later, someone asked me that. Well, you never talk about it. How do you feel about that period of time? And what I said to him is what I said to you. It was just all such a big fucking waste of time. Like, what was that? Why was that? What did I get out of it? What did the kids get out of it? What did the nanny get out of it? What did the parents get out of it? Or you? I couldn't find, I searched and searched and couldn't find anything that was the silver lining, the bright side, the whatever. Even being a type 1 diabetic, it's been decades and decades, but I can find silver linings of being type 1 diabetic. I'm not saying that's worth it, but silver linings, like I understand my body extremely well. I know exactly what's going on all the time, even to the point that I knew I had cancer before the doctors knew. I know my body really well because I have to manage it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for decades. So silver lining wouldn't maybe even go that far, but that's what happened, right? What was it all for? And even to this day, I don't think anything came out of it, right? I don't think that I had these grand lessons that I learned. I think there are a couple things I let people in. That's probably the biggest learning. That I had friends from my daughter's school, parents of her friends, who I knew pretty well, but they weren't friends of mine. And then many of them came to my house. Many of them wanted to give us dinners. They brought food over, and they would chat with me for a few minutes and realize that I was not feeling well, and they would leave again. So it's not like I had these great bonds with anybody, but I didn't resist having people bring over dinners, and I didn't resist people taking my kids for play dates, and I didn't resist so much help that my nanny gave me, and I didn't resist having my parents help out. And that was probably the first time that I really didn't resist accepting help. Because honestly, at that point, I had no choice. I felt like I had no choice, but I probably did have a choice. And I think it was a minor growth moment that I let people in a way that I hadn't before. But I wouldn't say that was the best way to have that lesson. I probably could have learned that lesson in 100 different ways. So I really look at it like a huge waste of time. So I have a story I'm going to tell on my daughter.
If you are liking the content, please like, subscribe, and comment. And if you're listening on an audio platform, please give us a 5-star rating. It really helps the algorithm. Thank you.
So I have a story I'm going to tell on my daughter. She was very, very young and very cute. So she was applying for boarding schools in 8th grade. She ended up not going to boarding school, but she was putting together applications just because she wanted to see what was out there for herself. And one of the questions that all of the boarding schools asked was, name a hardship in your life and explain to us what you learned from that hardship. And she was devastated because she didn't have any hardships. She said, my life has been so easy. I have no hardships at all. And this was a couple years after the cancer. And I said, well, your mom had cancer. And she's like, oh, well, that didn't bother me. And she didn't mean it didn't bother her. She meant she never thought that I was in danger, and that it didn't affect her in such a significant way because I was there for them in the evenings. I spent all of my evenings with them. So that was the whole purpose of spending time with them in the evening, and it worked. That she didn't look back on that as this significant point of insecurity in her life or fear that she would lose a parent. She really didn't look at it like the frightening thing that it was, which is, for a 10-year-old, that was a win for me. I was really happy about that. And she did have difficult things in her life. She just couldn't think of them at 12 years old or whatever she was.
Well, and also at 12 years old, when someone asks you something that has happened to you, you what has happened to the people you love isn't always an answer to that question
At that age, you're absolutely right.
at that age, because at 12 you still think kind of the world revolves around you, and so what happens to other people is their business.
Yeah, that's a good
And what they were
point. Yeah.
asking her was what's happened to you, and you sort of sheltering your kids from how dire it was probably a really great gift to them.
I think one could argue either way that sheltering them from something like that might not have been the best growth experience, but in that 6 month period where so much of my life was out of my control and I was uncertain and I didn't know where I would end up, and there was no options. There were no options open to me. I had one option which sucked, and I had to take that option. In that period of time, if I could control the way my kids saw my strength, I was going to do that. Even if I had to put it on a little bit by going to dinner every night, going to the dinner table, I was going to do that because I could control that. So there's another game. I guess my mom and I were really into video games at the time, but there's another game on the phone called Panda Pop. Have you seen this? So it's basically shooting little balls up into trees that have little balls, and when you match up three or four or five of the same color, they fall down, right? And it's this mom panda who's sitting on the ground who's shooting these balls up into the air because her baby pandas are in some of the balls in the trees. And so you want to make sure that all the balls with her babies fall down so she can go rescue them from whatever this is, right? And if you end the level and you've run out of ammunition and some of her babies are still stuck in the tree, this cartoon panda breaks down and cries and just says, no, no, no. And this cartoon was so well done that I'm like, yeah, that's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. This panda was destitute and crushed under the weight of having no options except one that goes forward without her babies, right? So I'm not talking about me going forward without babies. I'm talking about when you walk into chemotherapy, there is no option. It's like going to prison. You're not going to talk your way out of it or charm your way out of it or do half-assed. It's going to be just walk straight into it. That's the only option. And the despair of this mama panda who didn't win the level was just so incredibly well done that I couldn't play that game anymore because I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Just this despair, and her babies are still in the trees, and I have to go get sick for 6 months, like super sick.
So you and I have talked about that I believe that most human beings are perpetually on a search for purpose, meaning, and belonging. And one of the things that humans tend to do is to try to squeeze any ounce of meaning out of suffering that they possibly can. And I think it's because the idea that we could just suffer and there could be nothing good come of it feels like an additional assault on
Yes.
top of the suffering. And that if we can draw some meaning out of it, or if we can have some life lesson that comes from it, or some good event that happens because of the suffering, then it makes the suffering more palatable. And I believe that sometimes suffering is just suffering. So the fact that you are not finding some meaning or purpose out of it, or the fact that what you say is that it was just a complete and utter waste of time.
I think I said fucking waste of time.
Yes, it was a fucking waste of time. Period. Like that's it. I think, unfortunately, I think that sometimes suffering simply is, and sometimes there's nothing good that comes out of it.
I absolutely believe that, and I have to say that's one of the many reasons that I'm atheist right now. Not for the reasons you might think, not because of suffering, because I know suffering is part of the universe, and that's not the biggest problem I have with it. My problem with the religion, the Christian religious story that we were told, was the idea of Jesus being crucified on a cross with nails in his hands and feet bound, and he was being given vinegar to drink instead of water. So I understand that's suffering. And then he goes down to hell with the devil for 3 days, and they negotiate or do thumb wars or whatever it is they do, and then he comes back. And that was enough suffering to save all of humanity from that same kind of suffering. And you and I talked about this not too long ago, that if I had the choice of being killed with stakes in my hand for 8 hours and then spend 3 days in hell and then come back and everything's fine, I would do that instead of 6 months of chemotherapy with two kids on my own. And to me, this idea that what Jesus went through, this character of Jesus went through, was the most of suffering on our behalf, and then the suffering that I had, I think, is worse than that, then what's the point? Right? What did he go and do a spa day in hell for 3 days and then come back and then I still have to go through this? So to me, it doesn't make any sense. I can't wrap my mind around a religion that celebrates like death as the most of human suffering. Death is not the worst thing that we go through. It's not. Even a painful death is not the worst thing that we go through. I think watching a parent die over 8 months is one of the worst things that we go through, and so much worse than spending 8 hours dying on a cross. So it's just like the nail in the coffin of my religious beliefs for this religion.
And this is why I don't believe in a heaven or a hell. Because the concept of heaven or hell is that if you do a good enough job in life, you can go up into heaven, where you can spend all of eternity worshiping the God that didn't give a fuck when you were suffering down here. But if you didn't do a good job on earth, then you're going to live an eternity of what's the more worse than the worst we can endure here. And the older I got and the more suffering I saw people enduring, the less it made sense to me that one of the possible outcomes of surviving this world and then dying is to go and have it be worse there for all of eternity. And my brain can't accept that that's a possibility. Because if that was the case, I would live the rest of my days in abject terror.
Right.
So I just can't believe that there's a heaven and hell, that there's a place that exists to make suffering worse than the suffering that we have here.
But isn't this the point of religion, to scare you into obedience? Yeah, okay.
That's exactly the reason why it doesn't make any sense to me, because what's the purpose of that? What's the point of having a religion where you have to scare people to get them to follow it?
Exactly.
That already by itself doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't think one can be a good person if they're forced to be a good person. That misses the point completely. So then
the other piece of it too is that then we get to place value upon how much or how little suffering a person does, and how good a person is versus how bad a person is. And when you're in it, you spend all of your days trying to spin your wheels in the hopes that your good outweighs the bad. Like it's like a neck and neck your whole entire life. And I think one of the reasons why people try to suck some meaning out of suffering is because if I then suffer that badly, but something good came of it, then maybe I can tip the scales a little bit more in my favor of being a good enough person, because I endured the suffering that was given to me. I think it's abhorrent for some human beings just to imagine that suffering can just happen and it can just be as bad as it is.
It's a really hard reality to accept. But that is the reality. It is the reality. I have tried to squeeze some meaning out of this, and I even sort of take some meaning that probably isn't even related to the suffering. It was just suffering for suffering's sake. And there's another layer on top of that I want to put, because I was so young, I had all of the genetic tests that were available at the time to see if there was something related to my family or to my genes, and all of them came back negative for any kind of oncogenes. And the conclusion at the time was, that means it's environmental, and that means it's my fault. It's what I ate, it's what I drank, it's what I did, it's what I smoked, it's who I was around, it was the factory nearby. It was environmental, which at that point in my life was really, really hard to separate from it's my fault.
Wow, but even that really at a glance, your environment has nothing to do with your like it being your fault. Right? Like your environment is as much out of your control as your genes. I mean, I didn't hear what you specifically said about genes.
But that's not entirely true. My genes are my genes. I can't do anything to change that. We can
Yeah.
today, we can do that. But at the time, we couldn't. But my environment included what I ate.
Yeah, and you live in a country where what you have available to you to eat, what is accessible by financial necessity, or what is accessible by how close proximity you are to the grocery store, or how addicted we become to the foods that are not as good for us. All of that stuff is outside your control too.
So this is really good rationalizing. This is someone who's in the middle of feeling very, very sick for half of a year or more, who is told that there's no explanation for what you're going through. There's no scientific explanation for what you're going through other than stuff that entered your body either on your control or not your control. So I understand the rationalization. I have since, in the very long period of time since finding out that all the genetic tests were negative, I've 100% completely released myself from being at fault for having cancer.
Good. Good, because you're not 0% at fault for that.
I,
0%.
I agree with you, but I did like cured meat. I like cured meat today. There's nitrogens and other stuff in there. I love Diet Coke. There's aspartame in there. I loved Equal. I'm diabetic, so I couldn't eat sugar, so I ate a lot of Equal. Anyway, I'm just saying that it's very easy to also rationalize that there were things I put in my body that were not good for me. And I've had a couple of friends who react very, very vehemently. I have a friend whose mother died from cancer, and he doesn't eat meat or drink alcohol, or, I mean, lots of these things are not great anyway, but he abstains from everything that could possibly give him cancer because his mother died from it. And I understand that, but I think that's also a reaction that might not be coincident with actually what happened to her.
It's very likely not.
Exactly.
So this is one of the things that I learned when I was a very, very brand new mom. 9 months after I had my first baby, my baby was diagnosed with diabetes. Same ones you have. And I did all of that work, all of that. What did I do? What did I eat? What did I put in my body? What environment was I in? What if I hadn't moved to Minnesota? What if I got pregnant? All the things. I did all the things. And ultimately concluded that there's no way on God's green earth that there was anything that I could have done differently or would have done differently that would have made a lick of difference as to whether or not he got diabetes. And so I learned as a very young parent that there's just things we cannot protect our children from.
I completely agree with you. And at the same time, we ask ourselves these questions because we're human and we care about our kids. And to be able to say, there is nothing that I can do to protect myself from everything, and there's nothing I can do to protect my kids from everything, even devastating things. That's really, really hard because we do the seat belts and we do the car seats and we do the making sure they eat well. We do all of those things, and it's never going to be enough. And that's really hard to swallow.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's the same exact conclusion as to that there was nothing, no fucking good came out of you having cancer. It's the same line of there's not a goddamn thing that we can do to prevent everything. Like, I am all in on seatbelts. I'm all in on eating as healthy as is possible.
Because we can.
And if we do all of the things, we still can't prevent death, and we can't prevent suffering, and we can't protect ourselves even from all the things. I mean, ultimately, we're all human, we're all mortal.
And we live in a world where suffering is a reality. And it's, people don't want to hear that, you know? Like, people don't want to hear that, because if you accept that that's the reality, then you are also accepting that you can't control everything. And we do not like, as human beings, to not be able to control everything.
Especially some of us.
So even if we are blaming ourselves for the bad things that happen, it ultimately is because at least then we have some measure of control over the world. If it was my fault, then at least I still have a little control. And that's also an illusion. We don't have control over as much as we think we do.
So I can close with three. I was going to say I can close with three funny stories, but I'm not sure there's anything funny that came out of it at all. But one, I had a 2-year-old baby, and he's got a gigantic head. He still to this day has a gigantic head, and his hair makes his head even bigger. He's adorable. At 2 years old, I had this port put in right here, and it's under the skin, and it's essentially attached to the central vein. It is attached to the central vein, and that's how the medicine gets into the body. And for some reason, it was right up against a nerve, and it always hurt. The whole time that I had it, the whole 8 months that I had it, it hurt. But with a 2-year-old and a giant head, I would squat down and he'd run up, "Mama," and throw himself against me. And that giant head found this every single time. Every single time. So even today, when he doesn't run toward me, he's 5'9", but you know, if I go give him a hug, I'm like, I can still feel the pain there. The other piece of it is that as soon as I stopped the chemotherapy, they said, okay, recover. You do the 3 weeks of this one that you're doing right now. We're not going to do another one. Then let another 3 weeks go by, see how you feel. If you change your mind about doing more chemotherapy, then the port will still be in. And I said, no, I'm getting this out. I'm getting this out now. So 2 or 3 days later, my friend Robin, who was there, she took me to the hospital, and they did it's awake surgery. They just anesthetized the area to get the port out. And it was that one guy. There's a song called Stitches that was really popular around the time. Do you know that song? Shawn Mendes, Stitches.
Okay.
And it's about the pain of breakup, but they were playing Stitches really loud while they're taking my port out and sewing up these stitches. And it occurred to me at that point, because I had a C-section, I had a surgery when I was younger, and I had the chemotherapy, which was the surgery, which was laparoscopic. So there's one main scar, and then they went in from the sides and the top. So I had four cuts from that, 4 incisions from that, and then the C-section, the surgery from earlier, and appendix out. And then I had this one, which is 2 lines. It's the same scar. They had to cut next to the old scar. The scar at that point was 8 months old. So they cut right next to the scar. So it's basically just two cuts right there, 2 incisions right there. So from my neck to my knees, I have 18 incisions, 18 scars from 18 incisions. So I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of proud of that. That's not the story, but when I was getting the thing taken out and they were rocking out in the operating room to, I've been getting stitches, it kind of made me laugh. And I felt like it was almost over, so it was a good sign. And then one of my absolute favorite people on the earth had some mental health issues. There was a movement right after my son was born it was called the semicolon movement. And when an author is writing a sentence, they can end a thought with a period, and then that thought's over. They have to move on to a different sentence or stop right there. If they end that thought with a semicolon, you take a break and then you keep going on. And so this challenge to mental health issues was you get a semicolon tattoo. And what that means is, yeah, you got to take a break because things are not going well and you're not feeling good about yourself or whatever it is. You take that semicolon break and then you keep going. And this symbol was a great thing for uplifting mental health and talking about mental health challenges. And so my sister and I were going to get these tattoos together. You designed this beautiful semicolon for your wrist. Can you share that?
Yeah.
And we were going to go get those tattoos together. We weren't living in the same state, but you were going to go get yours. I was going to go get mine. And then I got diagnosed with cancer and I couldn't get that tattoo. So you went to get it by yourself, which was the right thing to do because I supported that movement. Yeah. I just couldn't get it because you can't get a tattoo when you're in the middle of chemotherapy.
No.
And then a couple years later, we got together, our families got together with you had 3 kids at the time and I had 2 kids at the time. And we got together in South Dakota of all places. And because it was midway between where we could fly and where you could drive to. And we got this big Airbnb with the entire household. And one day I said to you, let's go get my tattoo. I want to get my semicolon tattoo. And so we drove into middle of nowhere, South Dakota, and we found this tattoo place, these two white chicks drive in. It's called Convicted Tattoos, and they only hired people who were ex-convicts. And I just love this idea because I had this I've always had trouble with being a convict as being a one-way road, that you lose so much freedom, you lose the ability to vote, you lose the ability to get a good job. And the fact that this company was only hiring people who are convicts, taking your semicolon and then continuing on, like, yeah, we have to go there. So we found this place and we went there, and I got my semicolon tattoo at the end of my port scar. So it's kind of like an equal sign. And at the end of that, there's the semicolon tattoo. But I got it oriented in such a way that if I look in the mirror, I can see it. So it might not look right to someone looking at me, but it's for me and it's for you.
It's for you.
So we got that semicolon tattoo. So I took my fucking chemotherapy break, and then I went on, and I've had a nice life. I've had a really nice life since then. I didn't actually have cancer in my body after the surgery. They got everything. There were a couple of indications of metastases, but those were indications, not proof of metastases. And so the chemotherapy was really just in order to tip the scales in favor of me not having a recurrence. And that was one of the reasons that I could say at 6 months, I'm just done. I felt like I was going to die from that, not from the cancer. So I had to go in for colonoscopies and CT scans every 6 months for a while, and then every year for a while, and every 3 years. And when I reached 10 years out from the surgery, from the end of chemotherapy, they declared my risk of recurrence the same as someone who had never had cancer before. So that's where I am right now.
Yeah.
I don't totally believe that, but I'm going to go with that.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's going to really inspire a lot of people, and also speak truth to a lot of people, because there's probably a ton of people that feel the exact same way that you're feeling, and we don't offer a lot of space in our world to just feel despair. We're always trying to find some way to make despair less, and sometimes just to be given permission to feel that despair, I think is sometimes the thing that gives you enough to keep going.
I do have slivers of toxic positivity in me because I'm always looking for the best, and I believe in people, and I believe in not despair. And that was just fucking despair. It was just despair. And to be able to accept that.
Coming soon on Super Random Things with those sisters. I read a book the other day that it's got me shook. Like, I'm haunted by this book. And I think you might have read it too. And it is called Yesteryear.
I did read it. In fact, I requested that you read it because it got me shook as well.
Let's get into it. And just up front, there will be spoilers. So if you have not read the book yet and don't want to be spoiled, then just put a pause in us, go read the book, come on back, because we have a mouthful to say about this.
And there will be a movie, and if you don't want the movie spoiled, then just skip this one, go back to the other episodes we have.
In a nutshell, the book is about a Tradwife influencer who wakes up in 1855 and is living a pioneer lifestyle, basically living in real time the lifestyle that she was portraying living as a Tradwife influencer. And it hits hard. And the very first thing that I noticed about how hard-hitting it was is it cuts everybody, not just the Tradwives, but also what the author called the angry women. And I know I would be considered one of the angry women. I think it's despicable and heinous, and I hate it so much. And so I am most definitely one of the angry women. And what am I angry at? Patriarchy and misogyny. And the Tradwife lifestyle leads to both of those things.
So is your contention that the Tradwife influencer culture is a direct result of misogyny and patriarchy?
I am proposing that the Tradwife culture is not only a result of it, but it is intentionally perpetuating it. The influencers are trying to get people to go back to a patriarchal society. And there's just so many problems with that.
Draw the line for me between patriarchy and the uptick in
Tradwife influencers.
Hey, Asma, do you like your mom's content?
I do. Do you like it, Kiwi?
I really do. I like my mom's content.
It's amazing.
Hey, like and subscribe, please.
Like and subscribe.